Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bass. And if you are still struggling to catch fish this time of year, there's probably one tiny little mistake you're making. And that's what we're talking about today. If you're struggling to catch bass this time of year, you are not alone. Most people agree that this time period is the toughest period of the whole year to catch bass. In fact, a lot of people give up. Now, with that said, Tim and I advocate for this time of year. We really enjoy it because we've learned how to get in front of these fish and just waylay them when other people are struggling. We've done a handful of videos lately talking to you about how to do that as well. Now, if you have taken that advice and put it into play and it's working, awesome. But if you're one of the people that is still struggling, because I know that you're out there, if it turns out that your fishery is tougher than most and the fish just are not cooperating for you, we've got another trick. I mentioned in the intro that it's a tiny thing. Here's what that tiny thing is. It's tiny baitfish. In the spring, the shad spawn, the bluegill spawn, crappie spawn. What happens after that is all those little fry begin growing. By this time of year, they're big enough to be eaten by the bass, but they're still really small. If you're on a fishery where the bass just get tough, or if you're on a fishery where the pressure is brutal, people are just beating on those fish, matching that size profile can be all the difference in the world. It is not a secret that we like finesse fishing, particularly bait finesse, BFS. Throw in tiny little downsized baits. That's not a secret. But this is the most logical time of year to do it, when the vast majority of the bait fish that can be found in and around the shallows are that tiny little juvenile bait. Doesn't matter what species, doesn't matter if they're shad, bluegill, crappie, some other minnow, it doesn't matter. They're all junior size. They're all downsized, and this is the exact right time of year. If you've wanted to dabble with bait finesse or just playing with those smaller baits on traditional spinning rods, this is your time of year. This is when to play that game, from now through the fall. By the time we go through winter into spring, I mean, bait finesse smashes then too. It really does. But the baits themselves, the minnows, they're at adulthood that time of year. This time of year is when they're downsized. So I've got a handful of baits. Actually, it's quite a few baits that I'm going to show you guys if you want to jump down this rabbit hole. If you want to try downsizing, you will be amazed at the quality, and then even more than that, the quantity of fish that you can catch this time of year on those downsized profiles. We've got a handful of categories. I've got some rods for you too. I'm going to walk you through some of the bait finesse rods that I personally use at different price points. But of course, you can throw all this on spinning too. Bait-wise, we've got, what, 5 categories here. One being the Karashi, which is not a category, it's a single bait. We're going to talk about that first. Then it's downsized crankbaits. Then it's bladed baits. There's a lot of things in that category, and I'll explain that. Then it's topwater. And then it's jerk baits. Those categories, what you might have noticed is, with one exception, it's all hard baits. This time of year, downsized hard baits, fishing quickly, fishing aggressively, covering water. Now that these fish are really keying in on bait fish, you can cover water with those little profiles and you can catch them. Now, will you catch only giants? Absolutely not. Can you catch giants on these tiny profiles? Yes. But the big deal here is you can catch a lot of fish, particularly for somebody who's on a fishery where the bite's tough, where your lake has smaller fish anyway. This is about to take the whole fun factor through the roof for you. Now, where I'm throwing this stuff is as important as the baits themselves. A lot of fish, we've talked about this in other videos, as grass starts dying back, fish bail out of that stuff. They move to outside edges, they move up to hard cover, up shallow. And then of course, once they get on bait fish, they start running that bait. So in the shallows, if you're not visibly seeing bait or bass chasing bait, in the shallows, I would target hard structures. So dock pilings, laid down trees, stumps, things like that. You can also go to outside edges, but out in the open water, it's a little bit tougher if there's not fish giving you some visual cues. Now, the other place, especially as we start seeing more and more cool nights, bass will start driving bait fish back into the backs of creek arms and into longer coves. And that's where this can get really fun. And they can be on the steep walls, like on the bluff walls leading into creek arms, or you can find them all the way in the back, pushed up on the flats. You've got to check all that stuff. But anywhere where they can corral the bait, corral the minnows, that's where this is going to shine. So let's talk about that Karashi first. The Megabass Karashi is in a category all its own. This bait is half topwater, half subwalk, meaning you can get it to walk the dog, twitch, pop, work on or near the surface or down below the surface. You can even count it down, fish it slow and just barely bump it mid-column and catch a lot of fish that don't want to chase. But the fish that are willing to chase bait fish, you can fish this fast and they'll come up and blast it. And that is where throwing it on BFS, ultralight casting gear, makes all the difference in the world. I can fish this so much faster on this tackle than I can on spinning. It's just the actual dynamics of how you work it. I can work my wrists so much faster that way. And you guys probably know, if you've ever seen us talk about a Karashi, and I keep threatening to do a dedicated Karashi video. We get a lot of requests for it. I see those requests. I think we probably will do that video for you soon. Not yet, but soon. Where we've talked about how to throw this. We've shown you how to throw it. We've caught a ton of fish on it with you through the years. But it's always in another video. It's never been like a sit down, here's how to do it, why this color, why that color, when this retrieve, when that retrieve. I know that. I think we will do that for you soon. But that Karashi is remarkable. If you want to experience bait finesse, the one bait that you should pick up to try it first is a Karashi. It's just such a unique bait, and it fishes so well on this tackle that it really highlights the entire experience better than any other one bait that I can think of. Now, many of you know I throw that on a dedicated rod. The label's all falling apart. I throw that on the Cashin 7-foot light. It's in the Icon series. It's one of their bait finesse rods, the 7-foot light. It is not the lightest rod in the world. It's a very limber rod. When I fish this thing, the reason why I use this rod specifically is that when I get going really fast, that rod tip starts whipping, and the rod tip will work the bait faster than I can work it on my own. It's amazing. It's one of the few times where I felt like a specific rod is impacting my presentation enough that I'm catching more fish because of it. You compare that up to any reel, the Corrado BFS helps keep it at a mid price point. And then I typically fish it on straight 7-pound fluoro. Like, that's my main setup, is that Daiwa J fluoro, the hidden, which is the green. But I get really good cast distance out of that line, and it's extremely durable. I don't know anything about it to tell you why it is so durable, but I know that when I'm re-spooling my reels, the fluorocarbon reels that have that green hidden line on them, I spool less often. It lasts longer. But that is my dedicated Karashi setup. Again, if you're going to dabble, if you want one bait to dive into bait finesse, it's that one. Now, you can throw it on spinning. I found the Karashi before I found bait finesse. And I started out throwing the Karashi on a Megabass baby plugging spinning rod, and it does a great job. But it's easier to do on casting. So that bait is in a category all its own. We'll set that one to the side. The next category would be those tiny crankbaits. Now, it's no secret to throw crankbaits in the fall, right? A lot of people like to square bill. When that bait starts getting pushed up shallow, we love to go into the back of pockets, throw super shallow running square bills. It just works. So it stands to reason that when they're running tiny bait, the tinier little crankbaits will work. And they do. From Megabass, they've got the Griffins, the little BFS Griffins. We've got the medium runner and the shallow runner, and both can be excellent this time of year. They have a very tinny sound. I don't know if you can hear that. It's not a deep sound at all. It's almost like a glass rattle sound. Very tinny. I've talked about this bait before. This is no surprise. But these baits, when I first got my hands on them, I heard that sound and I thought, it's different. The fish are either going to love it or hate it. It's one or the other. Turns out they loved it. I have crushed them on these things. And it's funny. I mean, it's downright humorous. You're looking at somebody who carved a place in this industry throwing giant baits. Catching double-digit fish on swim baits is where my start came from. And I did it for many years. Not looking for a start, just out of passion and enjoying catching giant fish. But that became something. So for me, of all people, to be talking bait finesse today tells you how big of a deal this is. I mean, that I've gone through that transition from one end of the spectrum to the other. I still love catching big bait fish. I was throwing giant glides yesterday. But I also know when it's time to set it down and pick up a bait finesse rod. And you can catch me out on the lake this time of year, throwing that medium runner, kneeling and reeling, trying to get extra depth out of it to reach fish on outside edges. It's crazy, but it works. And the last bait in that category is a little Shimano square bill. That little 39F, the tiny, that bait catches them. Again, it's all about being the same size as those little bait fish. The bass are not chasing, for the most part, the bass are not chasing giant 5-inch thread fin this time of year in the shallows. They're chasing the little stuff in the shallows. So it just stands to reason that when I get that little profile, it works. This came about out of necessity. Tim and I were on the Tennessee River 4 years ago, and there were bass just blowing up on little bait. And we were throwing everything under the sun at them. We could not get these fish to bite. That's how this rabbit hole really got going for us. We could see these fish. They were chasing on the surface, and they were big. And we were determined to catch them. Now, from here, let's go bladed baits. And I've got 3 baits in that category, and all 3 are drastically different from one another. The first one is a bait Tim and I designed with dirty jigs. This is our mini underspin. Now we have a full-size underspin as well, but this is our mini. Comes with that little 1/0 hook on it. Now that's still a stout 1/0. So you can throw this on straight 6-pound fluoro on bait finesse. You can set that hook. But you can also throw this on 10 or 12 pound on traditional gear, and you will not bend it out. It can do both. But we built this bait specifically to pair to those smaller profiles. This is a 2.75 swammer. That's a 1/8 ounce in our tactical mini underspin. But that dropper arm will clear any major swim bait. Anything that you can think of, this blade will still spin underneath. We built the keeper on this to make the swim baits as durable as possible. We played with dropper arm length to get the clearance, but also to allow it to track perfectly true even when you're burning it. We were out to solve a problem. Tim and I don't build baits or heads because we want to. We build them because there's a necessity for it. It's been done wrong. It needs to be done right. That's when we get involved. So this little guy with that blade on it will crush this time of year. Anytime bass are on bait fish, you have to stand out from the crowd to get bit consistently. If they're just eating single minnows, you'll see me throw like a guppy head, bear swim bait, like that. But as soon as they're on schools of minnows, the blade is a necessity. You either have to have flash or sound or both. That's how you get bit when they're on bait fish, because you have to get their attention away from the thousands of real minnows that are swimming in front of them. So sound or flash makes such a difference. The next one is a spy bait. Now, Duo Realis built the spin bait series, right? Those are the staple in spy baits, if you will. But it wasn't until this year when they came out with the 70 size that they got one that you could really throw effectively on bait finesse gear. That little 70, I mean, you can cover so much water. If you're up on flats, if they're pushing them in the backs of shallow flats, I can throw this 70 forever on bait finesse. I can spool those reels. It's incredible how far it will go, and you can reach out and touch them, and a spy bait is just so effective. And then last but not least is another new one from Duo Realis. This is their, whoop, dropped it. This is called the Heart Bee spin bait. It's a very strange bait. We did a review of it a little over a month ago. It looks like a popper, right? Cupped face. That cupped face is actually hollow, and it opens to this blade in the chin. And then on the back end, it's got this stretchy curly tail on it. This bait is designed as an eye motion bait, so a bait with very little motion in the water. But what I've found is that, so there's a couple ways I fish it. When I did that review, I talked a lot about like twitching it and popping it and working it, almost like a Karashi. It's almost like a larger Karashi, but completely different action. Like the Karashi is a dream. It's amazing. It is in its own category all alone. This bait, I can rip it and pop it, but I'm just getting it to like turn, sometimes turn the same way. It's not like this dialed action, but I'm telling you, it works. I catch a bunch of fish ripping this thing, even though it was never designed for that. But I've got to say, in the last couple of weeks, I got on a pattern catching them on the straight retrieve like it was designed for, and I did not think I was going to like that action. And now this bait has earned its spot in that spy bait category for me. Completely different look, but you throw this thing out there and you slow roll it. It's got that belly blade that's churning, getting a little bit of vibration, getting a little bit of flash out of that. But then I think the real deal is that curly tail on the back just churning in the water. It's a different look. I've seen it when we target multi-species like musky fishing. Those curly tails on the back of hard baits, they work, they catch fish. I did not expect it to catch bass the way it's catching them, but it is. I mean, this has very quickly become a confidence bait of mine. When they come up schooling and I throw my other baits in there and they don't eat it, I've picked this up multiple times now, followed up, slow rolling, and dong, they eat it. And if they hit it and miss, I start twitching and popping and making that thing erratic, and they come back and get it. But I do think that that curly tail has a lot to do with it. So we've got that Karashi, we've got crankbaits, we have those bladed baits. The big category now is topwater. Topwater that's downsized is a riot. Now, I mean, you can see my boxes here. I have a dedicated topwater box. There's probably 75 baits in there specific to bait finesse fishing. We could have made this a serious rabbit hole. So I really tried to narrow it down, but give you some really unique baits that are worth a look. The first one is a walking bait. There's one walking bait. What was that? Oh, it was a cicada. My goodness, came right by me. One walking bait that stands out from the crowd, and this is a Megabass. So Megabass, along with several other companies now, have launched full lines of bait finesse baits. This category is erupting. It is. It is one of the largest growing, fastest growing categories in all of bass fishing because it works. But this little guy, this little Chiayu, this little walking bait is deadly. It stands out from the crowd. Super subtle. It likes to sit about like that in the water, and you just, and they come get it. The thing about baits in this BFS category, there's a lot of kind of clunky baits in the category. Things that are the right size, that don't really have the action. They weren't really, I don't know, I think it's new that people realize how effective this is. So before, companies kind of had baits in the category and some of them worked, some of them didn't. But they never realized this was going to be a mainstream thing. Now we've got these dedicated baits built for this, and it makes a difference. That walking bait stands out. 2 poppers. One is, again, from Megabass, the Baby Pop X. The dude is tiny, tiny, tiny. At least you think he is, until I put this Demiki Oompa out here. Now that guy is tiny. Both of these are amazing baits. I can get more distance out of that Baby Pop X. It's a little bit larger profile. I can cast it farther, cover more water, but you know the effectiveness of a popper, especially when they're in the backs of pockets, low light. You can send that popper back there and just bloop, let it sit, bloop, let it sit, and they just grenade it. The little Oompa. This thing is so overlooked, and I'll tell you why. It's because of how small it is. In the clear, I grabbed one that's solid so you could see it. It comes in some really clear colors. When I launch this thing on Bait Finesse, it'll land out there and it's so small and so clear, I can't see it. But the cup on the face, it's a real popper. It's got a deep cup. When I splash it, it has significant presence. It throws a lot of water. And that's how I keep track of it. This isn't just some little toy bait that you throw out there and maybe they eat it, maybe they won't. It's got the presence of a regular size popper. Sploosh, sploosh, when you work that thing. But then when the fish get up to it, it's tiny, it's the right size, and they massacre this thing. Now, one thing, I'm gonna go down a brief tangent here. You can see how micro these hooks are, right? Matching hooks on this Bait Finesse stuff has been brutal. That is now changing. Now, I've shown this before, but this is my Bait Finesse treble hook box, okay? Now, Owner Hyper Wires, my favorite split ring, now come in a size 1, and Tackle Warehouse stocks them. Then my trebles, I've got Owner ST26s, ST36s, and then the standard Gamakatsu round bends. Those are the various hooks that I personally use. But this list is what I wanted to show you. Hopefully you can see that. I sat and took the time to figure out the sizes of the hooks on all these major baits. So like those Demikis, the Oompa, that Oompa 40 takes a size 14 treble. Now you can upsize it, it'll still float one size bigger, but size 14 treble. That little Shimano Macbeth 39, that little tiny crank, those take a size 10. Rapala makes the ultralight crank, the ultralight popper, they both take a size 12. The Megabass Karashi, those are size 10s. The Baby Pop X, that's an 8 in the front, 10 in the back. The Dog X Junior, that Chiayu, size 8s. What else do I have? The X70, the X80, we haven't even gotten to those. The X80 takes a size 8. Little Bait Finesse cranks, those are size 10s. I did this so that I would have a quick sheet for me, so I knew how to swap them out quick to the various hooks that I needed. But if there's room in the video description, I will link as much of that information as I can. We're limited down there and there's a lot of bait, so I might run out of room and not be able to put it all in, but I'll put in as much as I can at the very bottom, below the baits, below the rods, very bottom of the list. I'll put as much of those sizes in there as I can, because this has exploded. We're wearing baits out, we're wearing hooks out, bending hooks, breaking hooks, and for the longest time there were no replacements. So it's awesome. Owner in particular, Owner and Gamakatsu both have tiny sizes now, but Owner bringing us a proper split ring, a size 1 split ring, that's what you need on this stuff. Makes such a difference. So, little rabbit hole, since I saw the micro hooks on that Oompa 40. 2 more baits for you from Shimano. They call this guy the BT bait. And it comes in both a floating and a sinking, but this is a bait that you're going to burn. This is a tiny swim bait. Burn, pause, and it takes off like a rocket. The one on the surface, well, both. One's on the surface, one's just under, but they both, and then you stop and they'll cut. And you can twitch them and work them and they'll dance. When the fish are really aggressive, they're on it. Now this is about the largest size that I like to throw on bait finesse. Anything bigger than this, I'm not throwing it on that dedicated ultralight bait caster. But this size I can still throw on there, and I mean, you can throw all the way to the end of that spool, no problem. Then the last bait is super unique, opposite end of the spectrum. That BT bait, you fish super fast, cover tons of water. This is a Jackal Piku Piku. One of the most overlooked baits there is. I even after doing videos where I go out and catch them on it, I don't think people understand this bait. This thing is so overlooked. This is a wacky rigged topwater. You tie to the middle, you tie right there. Throw that thing out, you keep your rod tip high, and you just shake it right in place. Throw it in the same places that you would throw a popper. We're not trying to cover a lot of water here. If I saw a fish come up out of a laydown and blow up on bait, I know that fish is still there. So I creep over there, and I throw a Piku Piku out over the top of that laydown. Shake it, let it sit. Shake it, let it sit. Until you've seen it in the water, you cannot understand this bait. It looks strange, I know, you have to get over that. The way this bait shimmies is identical to a fish laying on the surface, struggling to live. A shad that's dying. They get up there and they send out this little vibration. You see the little vibration on the surface. You know what I'm talking about. When you see this on top and you shake it, it's the exact same vibration. And I have seen fish come up like a rocket to eat this thing. I have crushed them on it. And I mean good fish on it. Not just little tiny fish. Good ones on this bait. The only downside is that I can't cover tons of water. I throw it to an object and I fish it. And then I reel it up and I throw it to a different object and I fish it. I'm not covering tons of water with this thing, but if I think I know where the fish are, it does an incredible job of converting those fish. And that brings us to our last category, which is jerk baits. Jerk baits, the baits themselves give that amazing flash, right? They stand out. They've got a lot of rattle to them. They stand out from the crowd, and they will absolutely get bit this time of year. The jerkbait used to be a fall and a spring thing, and that has changed. Now you throw them year round, but these downsized profiles in particular, from now until fall, I mean, we could do a dedicated video on just this. But I got you a shallow and a deep from two different brands. The first one is Duo Realis, and a big old bomb just went off, and the fish just kaboom, just blew up under a tree, killing me, killing me. From Duo Realis, we have two here, slightly different sizes. Whoop. The shallow bait is the 63 size. Let me fact check myself. Yep, 63 SP. That's the Duo Realis Rosante. The little guy, I think that's a 57. Am I right? Just going off memory. Yep, 57 MR. So shallow runner in the 63, medium runner in the 57. That one in particular, that little 57, that is the smallest profile that I have been able to consistently catch fish on. There are smaller baits on the market, but they don't work. At least not for me. They have not worked consistently. But that Rosante 57, I have flat wore these baits out. I mean, countless fish on them. I love throwing these around schooling fish. The medium runners in particular, you can work down a little deeper and you can get the bigger fish that are hanging below. And I mean, you can throw this thing on 6-pound fluoro, super light rod, just have a ball with it. And then that 63, just a hair bigger, stays up shallower in the column, just lets you cover water faster. The shallower runners, you can hit them harder. Deep divers or medium runners, you want to just bump them. Because every time you bump them, they're trying to dig. So you don't want to hit them as hard. Then the other two are from Mega Bass. We've got the X80 Junior, which I love for fishing shallow. Caught countless fish on that. Here's a size comparison to that little Duo Realis 63. The X80 Junior is a fair bit bigger, but it's still tiny. I mean, compared to like a Vision 110 or something, this thing's tiny. They crush it. That is such a fishy bait. That is my favorite in that Mega Bass lineup of the smaller baits. That's my favorite one. And then a deep running version, one that I've been playing a lot with this year, is in their Shading X line, the Shading XR62. And there's one that's even smaller than this one too. But the 62 seems to be that perfect balance where it's still a really small bait, but I can get good depth out of it. And one thing about this bait is it's super erratic. Major turns when I pop that rod. And again, you don't want to rip hard on these deeper diving baits. The bigger the bill, the more you just want to tick it rather than pull it. Okay, just tick it. Tick, 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 tick. This thing is super aggressive from left to right. You need to get fish to react. You need to get their attention. That's a fantastic bait to do it. That wraps up the baits themselves. Now, as far as rods, I'll just blaze through those. I've got 3 more rods sitting here besides my dedicated Karashi rod. Depending on how deep down this rabbit hole somebody wants to go, I grabbed 3 rods at different price points. And these are all combos that I fish consistently, but they're at very different prices. So I wanted to give you some examples where if you want to try bait finesse fishing, or you've been doing it, you want to try a higher end combo, whatever it might be, these are some of the combos that I personally trust. The high end combo is from Mega Bass and the P5 Destroyer line. This is their Pop X stick. I love this rod. Short little rod. It is a 6'3" little shorty. Super soft tip. This one is limber, but I'm able to do everything from throwing a Ned rig to, I've caught a lot of Karashi fish on it, little underspins, little poppers, all that stuff. I've been able to do it very effectively on that rod. And the rod is so limber that even tiny fish, you catch a 10 or 11 inch spotted bass or smallmouth and they will just rip on that rod. I have that paired up to a Shimano Aldebaran BFS, which is just an incredible reel. The ability to dial this reel in is amazing. It's got a magnetic drag in it. It comes with the magnets like maxed out. So if you ever get one and you're not getting the distance you expect, it's because you've got to pull magnets out of it. You can dial this thing in to throw the smallest stuff in existence. It's unbelievable. And then typically, again, I just fish that Daiwa Hidden Fluoro. 7 pound is like my main size. Sometimes I throw 6, sometimes I throw 8, but 7 just seems, if you're just gonna get one, that's definitely the size because it'll do everything for you. Everything except topwater. If I'm throwing topwater, braid to leader. But that setup, that is my high-end combo, and that is like the deal. Now, mid-priced, best bang for the buck for sure, Shimano X-Pride, which is no surprise, right? We love X-Prides. They just fish like a $400 rod or a $450 rod, but they're not. They're in the 2s. It's just amazing what you get for the price. So in that X-Pride line, that 6'8" light is a perfect all-around bait finesse rod. It throws the jig hooks really well. You can flip micro creatures with it, but you can also throw poppers, topwaters, jerkbaits, all the stuff on one rod. That's probably the most universal rod that I've got in my lineup because it's just right down the center and it can do everything. Pair that up with a Corrado BFS. Right there, middle price point. That's the reel that started this entire explosion in the US market. It just works. Again, because I'm using it for everything. When I take this rod is typically when I just want one rod. Either I'm on the jet boat and I think I might want to throw some bait finesse stuff, or I'm walking the bank and I know I want to throw bait finesse, but I don't want to carry multiple rods. That one is the deal. So I go really light braid, and then I can just put a leader on it and call it a day. On the budget end, from Cashin in their Element series, we've got that 610 medium light. That 610 medium light is an all-around action. That thing flexes extremely well, it loads up really well, but for the smallest treble hook baits, I think it's too stout. It shines more to the jig hook end than to the micro treble hook end, but it's at a price point where if you want to dabble in bait finesse, you're not going to beat that. And then I actually have that paired up to the Abu Garcia, the Revo X BFS. We reviewed that last month. That's a brand new reel that launched at ICAST, and we were able to get one, literally one, get our hands on one, just to get to know it, to have an opinion. And I've been very impressed with that reel. Now, it's a full-size frame, so it's large in your hand, full-size handles. It's not a tiny little dedicated BFS reel, right? Like, there's a significant size difference just in the body and the handles. That said, the price point is fantastic and its castability is solid. So if you want to dabble in bait finesse, if you want to be able to grab a tiny underspin and send it out there, it'll cast that stuff just fine. It's not a super high-end reel, but it's also not a super high-end price tag. And it will absolutely play the game and let you experience bait finesse. So if you're not trying to break the bank, or you just want to dabble, or you're on a budget, that's a great way to go. I mean, that combo, you're in like rod and reel, 270-ish, if memory serves me right, all in. And then again, I've got that, see a pattern here with the line on these reels? I really like that line for bait finesse. I use a lot of clear fluorocarbon as well, but I don't know what the deal is. When I use that line, I just spool up less of it. Guys, this time of year, downsizing is a real thing. It can be a tough time of year to catch fish, but it does not have to be. I have a ball this time of year. When those smaller bass start running that smaller bait, I forget about catching giants. I settle in on those 1 to 3 pounders, and I have the time of my life because I've dialed down my gear. I've got the appropriate gear for the job, and I just have a blast, and you can too. So in the video description, I'll link all the gear. Like I said, if there's room at the end, I'll give you as many of those hook sizes as I can as well. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.